All right. We're now into 2021, and we hope the Tezos community has enjoyed the holidays and everyone got to spend time with their family. As usual, I'm William McKenzie of Tezos Commons, and we also have Kenneth Garofalo as your host for today's session. Our guest joining today is Jev Björsell of ECAD Labs and developer of Taquito, a TypeScript library suite for developers on Tezos. Jeff and Ken, how are you both doing?
Good, thanks.
Doing well, hanging in there. So glad that we're into 2021. We can forget about 2020 moving forward here. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. So as usual, we'll be doing a Ledger Nano S giveaway. Ken, I'll let you talk more about that.
Yeah, guys, this is for everyone watching right now. So we are going to do this Ledger Nano S giveaway. It's branded with a Tezos logo. You know, it's quite a valuable giveaway here. So you want to pay attention. About halfway through the show, we're going to release a keyword. You're going to enter this keyword in the YouTube chat, and we're going to have a Nightbot select that random one winner out of everyone who enters this keyword. We'll have instructions after we announce the winner as well. So stay tuned, guys. About halfway through the show, in about 20 minutes or so, we're going to give that keyword out. So pay attention.
Yeah, definitely be on the lookout for that keyword. But I guess we can go ahead and kind of kick things off. Jev, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I got into systems and software engineering from a pretty young age. Like I grew up in rural Ireland in County Cork. There wasn't a lot to do. And I started playing around with like FreeBSD operating systems back then, building like an email server for that was in a closet in my bedroom. I suppose, I mean, it was the open source philosophy sort of always spoke to me like it was this lack of barriers to get into things. Like back then, if you wanted to set up an email server, you had to pay for like Windows licenses and like these different commercial projects and so on. And I was interested in that stuff, but I was always like kept away from it. And that's when I found like Linux and the BSD operating systems. So that was sort of my way into the thing. The lack of barriers was always something that was important to me. And from there, I mean, like moved to London with some friends. We set up a little like a web development company for a few years. And from there, eventually I moved to Vancouver, BC, which, I live here now. About 10 years ago, I started ECAD Labs, which is a software consultancy firm. We've been kind of catering to building infrastructure systems engineering projects, mostly to private sector. And eventually we started to transition more into blockchain and the Tezos space mostly.
So that's something I want to hear more about, the transition into the blockchain space, transition into Tezos. So a lot of the times we hear our guests on the show say that it's, partially the community, partially the newness of the blockchain and their ability to influence its direction that got them so interested in Tezos in the first place. But for you, Jev, can you tell us a little bit about, how you went down the Tezos rabbit hole and started building products for this platform?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess like it started, for most back in like when Bitcoin started to become known. I read about Bitcoin maybe in like 2010, 2011. And it was like, philosophically, it was like super interesting. It was, this permissionless system. You don't, you can set it up and get involved in it. Back then I set up like a toy miner and mined some coins. It was like super fun. And I mean, it was incredibly interesting to me. And I made a conscious decision at that time to like ignore it and just stay away from it. My wife and I had just started a new family. I had a job that pays, that isn't, like highly, So yeah, I decided to just not go down this rabbit hole. It looks like it could be an obsession. And then came along Ethereum and all the Bitcoin forks, DAO hacks, and also like this sort of moon boy Lambo culture that it sort of validated my choice of staying away from the space for a long time. It all looks a bit like a dumpster fire, albeit a lucrative one. But somewhere along the way, I was kind of nerd sniped by this thing called Tezos, and like it had on-chain governance, which like seemed like a wholly sensible thing to have, and like a good answer to all of these hacks these forks on other chains where suddenly you have like two sets of coins and it's like what. Tezos had spoke about like having this smart contract language, Mickelson, that's human readable on the chain, amenable to like formal verification. Like if we're going to be dealing with these smart contracts that are transacting in potentially billions of dollars of value, wouldn't it be nice to have some extra surety about its correctness? So it just seemed like a good thing. And then, also like proof of stake, the whole idea that we don't have to consume these massive amounts of energy to operate and guarantee safety of the network. And in proof of stake as well, there's this really nice alignment of incentives for the people, the bakers operating the network. Whereas in proof of work, you have holders and then you have miners, and those incentives are not necessarily aligned. So yeah, all of these things just like added up as like, okay, I think I need to dip into this. So I started playing around with the Tezos nodes in the early days before mainnet launch, and set up a baker on the test nets and subsequently on the mainnet. And I was a bit frustrated with when anyone who set up a baker, and at least in the early days, it's like you set it up and it's sort of an anti-climax. It's like, is it working? It's like, how do I know if it's working? I don't know what it's doing. So, I kind of went deeper using packet sniffers to figure out what it's doing. And that led me into building some tools for observers, for like telemetry tools, monitoring tools, to kind of see what it's doing. And yeah, kind of one thing led to another. This was all sort of like on my free time, besides on the side of like paying work within ECAD Labs, because we had non-blockchain projects back then, especially. So that was sort of my avenue in what enticed me. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, you basically were just the greatest marketer Tezos could ever have there, citing the formal verification, the predictable governance, and the proof of stake consensus mechanism that it features. I mean, those are all things that are really attractive, that make this a much more mature blockchain than some of the ones that have existed in the past that have dealt with issues like the hard fork, like for instance, the Bitcoin Cash hard fork that we saw in 2017. It's just no one wants this unclarity around how to upgrade a protocol, and Tezos introduced that clarity. So it's clear to me what you see so attractive in Tezos. And we do have some announcements. So again, Jev's company is called ECAD Labs. You can find more information on ECAD Labs at ecadlabs.com. Jev has some cool announcements that he's going to make here later in the show. We're just teasing the announcement right now. He's not actually going to reveal. But Will, why don't you go ahead and take us into the next topic, which is all about ECAD Labs.
Sure. So, Jev, you kind of talked about your background a little bit earlier. Could you kind of talk more about your role at ECAD Labs?
Yeah, sure. So ECAD Labs, I founded it as in, I think it was around 2011. Essentially just as a consultancy entity for myself. So it was only me back then. We've grown a little bit since, and I mean, a funny small aside is the term ECAD is commonly kind of misunderstood or reasonably understood as electronic computer-aided design, but it doesn't tie into that at all, actually. ECAD is it's a biology term, and it refers to or describes the ability for cells to adapt to their chemical environment. So it's sort of like similar, along the lines of evolution. And it was never conscious, or I never really sort of like noticed it, but there's some parallels there in that thinking to Tezos and its ability to adapt on-chain governance, the whole self-amendment. And I mean, in the paper, the Bitcoin paper by Arthur refers to the game Nomic. So there's some fun parallel there. But yeah, so as an independent consultant, I worked with a few different companies building software and teams in the internet telephony space, working a bit with internet service providers. So a lot of work in sort of observability systems, monitoring, quality of service, that sort of thing. And more and more some application level stuff as well. And then this side project of Tezos that I was sort of like getting obsessed with. It was in my head all the time. So eventually, like I started building some of these tools that I mentioned for observation and metrics. And then some of my teammates, as we grew, they started helping out in this. We started building more stuff, releasing it open source, which goes back to my sort of my roots of wanting software to be like free and make things accessible. Lower those barriers to entry. So that's how we kind of got our start into the Tezos ecosystem, and it's been super fun.
Yeah, and actually touching on those tools, would you care to explain more about Gotezos?
Gotezos was probably the first library that I worked on, because so I wrote a Prometheus exporter. So Prometheus is it's a metrics system, so it allows you to monitor things, arbitrary things. And this exporter basically takes data from the Tezos node, such as like the number of peers that it currently is connected to. So I wrote that in Go, and a spin-off of that was this Gotezos library. So it's essentially just an RPC client library in Go. It's not very actively maintained at the moment. But yeah, that was my first sort of foray into actually writing software for the ecosystem.
Gotcha. I think probably the most popular thing that most of everyone watching this has heard is Taquito. Would you kind of explain Taquito for those who may not know exactly what it is?
I mean, for people outside of Tezos ecosystem, but that are in the blockchain sphere, the easiest way and what other people have said is that like it's sort of Tezos' equivalent to the Web3 libraries. So it's a library that any JavaScript or TypeScript developer can use to build dApps or backend applications. So if you want to build some sort of like card game or anything that's browser based or possibly like on mobile as well, you can use Tezos to interact with smart contracts, and it makes the interaction with smart contracts a lot easier than trying to do it manually directly. Because in Tezos we have these low-level primitives, or the Michelson and such, and those primitives are very, very powerful, but they are low level, and that serves as like that creates a technical barrier to entry to a broader set of software developers. So with Taquito, it reads and parses these low-level language that makes Tezos work, and provides you with a higher-level abstraction that feels like a typical boring old JavaScript objects that you can call methods on, and those methods correspond to smart contract entry points. Taquito is, I mean, philosophically, we've created it to be like, it's intended to be like kind of a boring library, in that it should be easy to read for the larger set of software developers out there, be they of computer science background or self-taught developers, so we want it to be accessible to the larger set, be it like a weekend warrior who's curious and they're learning HTML and JavaScript and CSS, and they also want to do something with blockchain, up to being accessible to your senior veteran engineers working at a Fortune 500, another kind of side goal of this as well with Taquito is that we do want to make it accessible so that it's easy to read, because we don't necessarily want to trap the market and have everybody use Taquito.
Right.
And it's happened that new teams have come in and they come and they read the source code of Taquito to figure out how things are done, and then they go off and build something themselves, and that's absolutely success for us. I mean, that's what we really like to see. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you really dove into Taquito a little bit there, and you've explained pretty well exactly what it is. Lowering that barrier to entry for someone who's maybe more familiar with JavaScript and they want to compile down to a contract written on Tezos, right? So, Mikkelsen, talking more about this as a standalone product, I just want to see if you can maybe reiterate more about the philosophy behind why this should be a standalone product and not really incorporated in a fuller stack.
Yeah, so it was always, within the project itself, we have one high-level package, but that's a composition of a bunch of lower-level packages. And then as a project, Taquito, it has its own standalone brand. We haven't tied it strongly into ECAD Labs. ECAD Labs happens to be sort of like the back-end group that do most of the maintenance. But it's intended to be a library that you can come and take the bits that you need, and but not have to buy into like a giant SDK. For example, Taquito supports like a local forging. So this is like making the bytes that actually constitute an operation. If another project needs to do local forging, they don't want to rely on a Tezos RPC to do the forging, they can import just that narrow package and leave all the other abstraction mechanics of Taquito behind. So it's sort of take what you need, then Taquito being its standalone project, we couple to the Tezos blockchain. But we try, generally we avoid coupling to higher level tools. So we don't have we don't have an indexer, or we don't have tight coupling with a specific high level language. Now we work with Lego and SmartPy, these are excellent languages, and at some point we will integrate with these languages, but we'll do it on a sort of an interface specification model. So by using Taquito, you don't have to expect to be tied into our choices or our preferences or somebody else's preferences. So we want to always maintain that level of choice for engineers when they come along and build these things.
Yeah, I think that is a great philosophy to have. And in regards to your participation in the CII badging program for Taquito, do you want to just dive into a little bit about what that is and how you maintain standards and best practices?
Yeah, sure. The core CII, it stands for the Core Infrastructure Initiative. I believe it comes out of the Linux Foundation, and essentially it's a questionnaire that and you get to put a badge in your project. And it's a bunch of sensible questions of like, does it, starting with table stakes stuff, like, does your project have a README that describes what it does? Do you have a policy on how to report security issues? Up to does your project have unit tests, integration tests, and a CI/CD pipeline? So this is a really good like badge program for project maintainers to make sure that they are sort of meeting these industry best practices. And it also it's a good signal for institutions or organizations, teams, when they are evaluating software to say, is this project well maintained? Is it mature? Is it going to stick around? Because I mean, that's a problem in open source. It's like, it's like, oh, this project does everything I need, but is it developed by one single guy in his basement in East Vancouver that might lose interest or get hit by a bus? The Core Infrastructure Initiative badge program like helps signal some of that stuff of the maturity of a project, and I do hope that more projects in the Tezos ecosystem participate in that badging project, because it's an easy thing to do, and there's some things that we're like, oh yeah, I probably should implement static analysis from a code base. It's easy to do, and it adds a lot of value.
Absolutely. And for anyone wondering maybe what they can build using Taquito, you have a good example there. It's just a boilerplate app that was created as a small sample project that checks and displays an XTZ balance when it looks like a address is imported. I believe this is available on GitHub, and again, you can find the links to this on tezostaquito.io. And it's just a quick example of something, a D app or an app that can be built using Taquito.
Yeah, so we have two boilerplate apps or template applications on GitHub. One which just uses, it's a sort of framework agnostic. It uses jQuery for anyone who remembers that. And another one that was created by Claude Bard, which is a React-based boilerplate app. So you can click on the use template there, it'll fork it, and you'll have a project in your own GitHub repo, and it has all the dependencies and some basic functionality already implemented there. So that's a good place to get started and playing around with Tezos using Taquito. Taquito, I mean, it's used in quite a lot of places. It's used for a lot of dApps out there. So on the web browser front end, you can see this on our GitHub repos. There's a used by list there. It'll list a lot of different projects using it. It can also be used on the back end. So if you're building like a back end service that needs access to the blockchain, needs to originate operations or just read data, it can run it as a Node.js app as well. So not necessarily on the front end. And then we see it also being used in a few different Tezos wallets as well. Such as like Thanos and Zengo and a few others use it. And then we also, we see it being used by some larger institutions as well. Last year in 2020, the foundation commissioned a security audit, which was conducted by Least Authority, which was, went pretty well. And then we also had another security audit was done by a team called Doinsec. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. And that was commissioned by some institution. We still don't know who it is, but they came along, audited Taquito. They also did some auditing on, my social media accounts and GitHub and Gmail. So that was sort of felt a little bit invasive, but I was grateful for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that can't hurt. And just to update the audience here, if you haven't caught on yet, the keyword for today's giveaway is Taquito. You want to enter capital T, Taquito. You'll see it displayed on the screen here. You want to enter that in the YouTube chat, and we will, again, qualify you to win the Ledger Nano S, and we'll announce that winner at the end of this episode. We are starting to get some questions that are rolling in from the audience. I don't want to neglect those, so I'll just bring them up here. Ito is a topic we are going to get into in just a moment, but I believe one of the questions from Sergio from the audience is, will Taquito support NFT, Ito, or tickets? Is there any updates needed for Taquito in order to support those?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have preliminary support for EdoNet in terms of it being functional for existing applications without any sort of regressions. Presently, we're adding support into our Michelson parsers and encoders so that it works well with all of the new Michelson opcodes and such. We will be so we're figuring out how we can better represent things like tickets and sapling features as if it's going to serve our users well and make things easier, then we'll make higher level APIs for those features so that it's easier to use these primitives. And Claude, who you all know, he's been working with us for some time now. He's working on some kind of exploratory projects using tickets, and so through that early exploration, we get to sort of see what parts are kind of tedious or onerous, difficult for a developer to work with, and then we start building what we hope to be sensible abstractions on top of that.
Interesting. While we're on the topic of questions, we also have another one from Blind Ripper. Blind Ripper asked, how far is Finality development? Are you involved in this work or have any insights on Tenderbake and Chronomet?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So we're not directly involved with those yet, but as a sort of an aside to that, we are working on getting sort of earlier collaboration with the core developers and upcoming new protocols earlier on in the what I started calling like the protocol lifecycle. The protocol and on-chain governance, how it gets voted in. I mean, there's plenty of parallels with like well-known software development life cycles, but there's a lot of new sort of facets and wrinkles that make that challenging. Up until now, we've gotten access to these new test nets and test protocols probably later than we could, and that's not that's just the way it is. I mean, we're a relatively young network, but that's getting better. In the case of like Tenderbake and Chronomet and these finality systems, I'm pretty sure we're going to start integrating with those earlier on in the process, so that we can give early feedback to the core developers, and then also when these protocols get injected, we have support for them in Taquito and other tooling earlier on in the lifecycle, and that's really on a technical aspect, I mean, that's sensible, but it also feeds into the governance life cycle as well, because the more experience we and other teams like us have with these protocols before injection, the better positioned we are to express our experience with those new features, and that allows token holders to have be better informed when they're voting in on-chain governance. So there's a holistic whole there that is going to benefit from having earlier access to these things, I'm really excited about fast finality.
So I think before we move on to the topic of Ito, we're going to focus more specifically on Ito. This would be a good time if you haven't already, just to introduce two other products that have come out of ECAD Labs, Signatory and Tezos Exporter. Just a little bit more on those, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Signatory it's a what we call a remote signer. So in cryptography and blockchains, not your keys, not your coin, not your key, not your coin. The secret key is very, very important. You need to protect that thing. Signatory is a remote signer, so it basically will allow you to store your key in a number of different hardware security modules, HSMs. So HSMs have, they've been around for years, used typically by massive banks. They've been very expensive. And essentially what they do is they store your key in a way that you can't get the key out, but you can send data in and you will get a signature back. So it puts some more security between you and an attacker stealing your key. So Signatory it allows Tezos bakers or Tezos application developers to send operations to Signatory and have them be signed, get back a signature for inclusion into the blockchain. There's a number of there's a couple of different remote signers in the ecosystem already, supporting namely AWS, for example, and they're great. So by the Taco Infra, Luke and Kiefer there. What I saw there was, well, two things. The reason I built that project, we started that project, was one was that I saw there was this consolidation in infrastructure. So if the only remote signer in the ecosystem supports AWS only, then we're going to have centralization on an infrastructure layer. And Tezos remains to be decentralized. But if all of the Tezos nodes end up running on one cloud provider, then we have this centralization on the infrastructure layer, which isn't healthy. So we built Signatory, and it's not actually a 1.0 release yet. We're conservative when it comes to removing beta tags. We still have more docs to write and formal testing to do on Signatory. But what I will say is that it supports a UBHSM, which is a relatively inexpensive HSM device that'll store your keys, and it's you can run this on-prem. We have upcoming support for using it with Ledger devices with the baking app, and we have preliminary support for Azure's key management system and Google's key management system. The value of having all of those different backends is that it gives users of Signatory and Tezos some portability between these systems. So they hopefully have some level of mobility between infrastructure. Again, I like having choices, and I like having other people have choices as well. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great that you're able to provide those solutions to the ecosystem, even if they are just in beta. I mean, you're still working to build them out. So be aware. I think now is a good time to get into the topic of Ito. I think this is going to be a hot topic. A lot of the audience wants to know, what are the features coming with Ito? How are these going to be used? Maybe more insight from you in general, since you are so technically experienced. I know you already mentioned a little bit about tickets and about Claude and how he's testing that feature a little bit. But Ito introduces tickets. Explain to us from your terms, what is tickets and how will this benefit the ecosystem?
Yeah, so on a pretty high level, tickets are going to be, they should give us a lot more safety in how we deal with assets on the blockchain, and they should be easier to reason about and audit as well. So it's still kind of early days, because we've got these low level primitives in the protocol now, and there's we have applications and use cases for them, But we're still in the earlier stages of actually. So it's kind of like, back in the day, your Pentium processor on your 386 has a math code processor, but it's useless unless there's actually applications that are making use of that thing. So the stack going from the core protocol to lowest levels, that's maturing now up along. So when we're going to start seeing a lot more interesting things happening with tickets, and I think it should have a very good impact on things like fungible and non-fungible tokens, and it should be pretty interesting. I think there's going to be some innovative uses that I can't even imagine yet.
Absolutely, and I think the next feature, which is sapling, is probably what's getting the community the most excited, adding this privacy feature to Tezos. And we did hear earlier when I think it was France's finance minister make some kind of comment or remarks in regards to central bank digital currencies needing some sort of privacy layer in order to operate, right? So maybe this is Tezos introducing a feature that could help them win, CBDC contracts with federal banks, going forward in the future. So maybe a little intro to what is sapling and how is this being integrated into Tezos, and what will people be able to do with it once it's integrated?
Yeah. Yeah, sapling is really, really interesting, and it's funny. It's like the Minister of Finance for France, sort of name drops Tezos in this context of privacy, and it seems counterintuitive because you would expect, from kind of a hot take perspective, you might expect governments to not really want privacy on blockchains, but it seems to be a very important deciding factor for central bank digital currencies. Things like these pilot programs with the digital euro and stuff like that. It's going to be very, very interesting. It's another one of those where there are some use cases that might seem like private transactions and so on, but with lower level like privacy primitives like that, it has so much potential in how it's actually implemented and applied, and I don't think we've realized yet how this is going to be. We haven't imagined yet of how a lot of this stuff is going to be used. There's a quote from a science fiction author, William Gibson, and it's the street finds its own use for things. So we might have intended something to be used in a certain way, but the internet is wonderful for finding new uses for these things, and that's super exciting. In terms of support for sapling, we're doing some research into this at the moment. At a minimum, we're adding support for all of the opcodes so that you can originate and call contracts that have sapling primitives. And we're figuring out how what the surface is for Taquito in terms of things like doing signing, and reading back and decoding data with things like view keys and so on. We're getting there. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting features in the EDO proposal. Personally, the one I'm most looking forward to is the adoption phase. I think for a while, and also, as you brought up earlier, there is a definite need for more coordination, around developer tooling, and, kind of coordinating that in conjunction with activations of these protocol upgrades that go through. So what are your thoughts on the adoption phase, Jev, and how that affects ECAD?
Well, I mean, not having an adoption phase is a bit nerve-wracking. So I'm not sure, was it Babylon or Carthage? But we were at the last phase of voting, and we were like a few percentage away from quorum, and it was it was like less than a week from when the protocol would actually transition. So it was only a week away, and so the vote could have gone. We may not have hit quorum until like a few minutes before the transition. So it's like, are we going to the protocol or are we not going to the protocol? And that's nerve-wracking because we had support for the new protocol, and Taquito is a tooling layer. So there's DeFi teams and institutional teams that are building on top of these our libraries, and they need to know what's happening. So the adoption phase is very, very important to give runway to teams like us, as well as all the teams building on top of our tooling, so that they have a fixed amount of time saying like, okay, this is happening, and this new protocol transition is going to happen approximately on this date at this time, and then they can rally, coordinate their software engineering testing efforts around that to be ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think on the same topic of, increased collaboration, there's also been a lot of more work being done through various teams with some informal working groups.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, the scarce resource in the Tezos ecosystem, I think, is time and human power, and so it was my impression that we had a bit of siloing happening between teams, and it's not out of any sort of that was happening more because collaborating and coordinating there's overhead with that. It takes effort to communicate effectively with teams, and in the past, 7 to 8, 10 months, in large part thanks to people driving this, like Jacob Arlock and Lewis, and a few others. We've started getting these relatively informal, regular meetings, and an example of this is around the wallet interaction specification, TZIP 10, which is implemented in the what most people will know as the Beacon SDK from the Papers or Air Gap team. Andreas and the team there at AirGap, they did this wonderful work of specifying a wallet interaction system, and they put out version 1 of this Beacon SDK, which was functional and worked, and had some rough edges, and there was a little bit of a lull in that period because I don't think they were getting as much feedback as they could have been. And that around summer last year, we started having these regular calls between our team Taquito, AirGap, Thanos, Kukai. I think Galleon was involved in there somehow as well. And so all of these wallet developers, who you might think are like, our competitors, were working together to make this interaction spec really work. Those regular calls were hugely beneficial and a lot of fun as well. And so then we got version 2 of the Beacon SDK, and the user experience between dApps and wallets has gotten remarkably better now. The idea of standardization is really important in this space as well. So a little bit of background on Beacon and TZIP 10 is, previous to this, if you were building a new DeFi application, you had to choose which wallet or wallets to specifically integrate with. So it's like if you're making a web page and you had to make a choice of whether it's going to work with Google Chrome or Firefox or whatever that other browser is. That kind of sucks. But if you build your web page, to the specification, then it should just work for free for all of those different ones. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we, and I say we as the group, not Taquito, but have done with Beacon. So it allows a DeFi dApp developer to just use this TZIP 10 implementation, and then their users can choose which wallet they want to use, be it Thanos or Airgap's wallet, Kukai or Galleon, and that's powerful and very important.
Yeah, that's really great. I think a couple of projects can definitely start to kind of learn a bit from Tezos. I won't name any specific names, but we do have a winner for the Ledger Nano S giveaway, and that is Danny Godbolt. Danny, make sure you send us an email over at social@tezoscommons.org, and we're going to request that you take a screenshot of your account so we know that is you. Congrats on your Ledger Nano S.
Congratulations, Danny.
Yeah, absolutely. That's over $100 value right there. That's a pretty good giveaway.
Right.
I'm jealous. One other collab thing that I'd like to mention as well, that I'm excited about. We haven't really started, but ECAD, we've recently joined as a member entity to a group called DINAC, which is the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. So this is they're doing something called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, and so we've joined that. It's a group of government and institutional and private sector members, and it's focused around digital identity and authentication. So our driving reason to join that is to on some level be an ambassador for Tezos, if in the domain of decentralized identity. And we're looking forward to working with teams like Spruce ID and hopefully advocating for use of those systems within Canadian institutions for decentralized identity.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing to hear that collaborative effort is going on, and thank you for doing that. We realize it takes some time. That's not always rewarded up front. So anywhere you can be an ambassador for Tezos is greatly appreciated. So audience, I don't want you to drop off yet. We are getting near the end of the show, but we did tease an announcement earlier, and I think Jev, this would be a good time for you to tell the audience exactly what that announcement is.
Yeah, sure. So we have some new features coming up in Taquito itself. So one of our engineers, Roxanne Lethrow, has been instrumental in implementing support for the TZIP 16 specification. This is to do with contract metadata. And it might be a sort of a lower level nerdy feature in a certain extent, but it's pretty powerful. So we will be releasing this in our next, there is a pre-release of this already for anyone who wants to get early access to it. And this will be released pretty soon. Following closely on that is contract support for contract metadata. And this really makes asset contracts, be they fungible or non-fungible, it's going to help give wallets generalized support for working with any asset contracts that follows the standards. So up until now, we've had a lot of wallets that integrate directly with specific asset contracts, and they have to add those directly. And this should allow to generalize that. So if you have a wallet, you can choose whatever asset contract you want to interact with without having it being hard coded into the wallet. Again, choice. And then the other, it's I suppose a disclosure of a product that isn't quite 1.0 production ready, but it's getting there. It's called Tezgraph, and you can get it on tezgraph.com. So this is a super exciting project for many reasons, but one of the reasons is because it's been a collaborative effort between us and Agile Ventures, and also Nomadic Labs. So Tezgraph is a GraphQL API that builds onto you can use it to query index data that's indexed by the Nomadic Tezos indexer, as well as subscribe to real-time data from a Tezos node. and GraphQL is sort of, on a certain level, it's like it's the new hotness of API design. It's a lot of people regard it as the next step from RESTful APIs. It's self-describing, it's strongly typed, and web developers tend to think it's a joy to use. So hopefully making Tezos data more accessible through this work. We have an early release of it, and we're going to be doing the 1.0 general release later this year. An aspect of this project that's really neat is because it's a joint developed with Agile Ventures. It's one of its primary goals is for it to be self-hostable, so anybody can host one of these a TezGraph instance with indexed data or just for subscriptions themselves. So it should be very easy for you to run and operate yourself. If you're dealing with index data, there's a lot of data storage, so there is an operational cost to that. But that is one of our first class concerns. And then we're already operating a public accessible node for this, so people can use it as just a public API where they can do queries from. And Agile Ventures are going to be independently operating a version of this as well. So this is very good in terms of bus factor. And bus factor is a sort of a bit of a morbid software engineering term or term where if you have a bus factor of 1 and that one person gets hit by a bus, then your project or your product is in trouble because there's no one to operate it or maintain it. So with TezGraph on the software development side, we have an organizational bus factor, and each of those organizations have more than one person. We have 2 organizations developing this, as well as 2 organizations operating independent nodes that are going to be publicly accessible as well. So if I have an operational outage, due to some sort of DevOps, DevOps thing, users of that public API can switch over to Agile Ventures API, which is operated independently, and that's I think that's a pretty good, strong proposition. So.
And staying consistent with your philosophy to collaborate as well with Agile there. So that's great to hear. And if anyone wants to find more information, again, that website is tezgraph.com. And Jev, this is the part of episode where we sort of wrap up. I'm going to mention some of your social handles. People can find you specifically on Twitter at JevOnEarth. They can find ECAD Labs at ECAD Labs, and they can find Taquito at Tezos Taquito. These websites, again, are ECADLabs.com, TezosTaquito.io, and TezGraph.com. Do you have any other closing statements, any other places people can find you and interact with you, say any support contacts that you have, Jev?
Sure, yeah. Anybody interested in trying to build something on Tezos, just come along and do it. Be it using Taquito or some other toolkit. And we have a community support channel on Telegram for Tezos Taquito, and we're always happy to help out there, as best we can. And generally, thanks to the community in Tezos, it's there are what I would say are hostile communities in the cryptocurrency space and blockchain space, and Tezos thankfully isn't one of them. And it makes it makes coming to work every day so much fun for me. I couldn't be in a better place.
Excellent remarks, Jev. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone watching in the audience, I hope you had as fun a time watching this episode as we had hosting it. For Will, I am Ken. Again, we had our guest, Jev. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. If you want more information, you can go to tezoscommons.org/TezTalks to find our upcoming list of guests and interact with us on social media at Tezos Commons. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time, take care.